Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel. Today we are going to take a deep dive into a ship that carries one of the most iconic names in the Philippine Navy, a vessel that has sparked conversations, debates, and even a sense of nostalgia among naval enthusiasts. This is the story of the BRP Maharlika, a ship that has stood as both a symbol of Filipino heritage and a reminder of the struggles of a Navy trying to modernize in the face of limited resources. When we talk about the Philippine Navy, most people today think of the brand new missile frigates, the Jose Rizal class, or the highly anticipated submarines that the Navy has been planning to acquire. But behind the headlines of modernization are ships like the Maharlika, vessels that may not have the glamour of cutting-edge technology, but have carried the weight of decades of service, fulfilling missions that often go unnoticed, but are deeply felt by the people they served. The name Maharlika itself is powerful. In pre-colonial Philippine society, the Maharlika were the noble warriors, not royalty, but a class of free men who owed allegiance to their chieftain and who fought bravely to defend their community. To give a naval ship the name Maharlika is to invoke the warrior spirit, the sense of nobility, and the cultural pride of being Filipino. This is why when the BRP Maharlika entered service, it carried with it not just steel and weapons, but a name that resonated with history. It's a name that has appeared in political speeches, in cultural debates, and even in discussions about possibly renaming the country itself. But the ship behind that noble name tells a story that is both inspiring and complicated. The BRP Maharlika, also designated at one point as PS-19, was not originally built in the Philippines. Like many ships in the fleet during the latter half of the 20th century, it came from abroad, reflecting the close relationship between the Philippines and the United States. In fact, the Maharlika was originally a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, a ship designed not for heavy naval combat, but for patrol, rescue, and constabulary duties. When it was transferred to the Philippines, it immediately filled an important role. The archipelagic nature of the Philippines means that it has one of the longest coastlines in the world, and patrolling such a vast maritime domain is no easy task. The arrival of Maharlika meant the Navy could extend its reach, asserting presence in waters where smuggling, piracy, and illegal fishing were common threats. At first, the ship was welcomed as an asset. It had endurance, it could travel long distances, and it was relatively versatile compared to smaller patrol craft. Its role wasn't to engage in missile duels or high-intensity warfare, but rather to safeguard Philippine waters, escort supply ships, and show the flag in far-flung areas of the archipelago. In a way, the Maharlika was like a guardian, quietly patrolling and ensuring the security of maritime routes that connect the islands. For a country dependent on sea trade and island-to-island connectivity, this was no small responsibility. But ships are more than tools of state power. They are also lifelines during times of crisis. The Philippines is one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, struck by typhoons, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions almost every year. In those moments, when roads are blocked and airports are unusable, the Navy becomes a critical responder. The Maharlika was often part of humanitarian missions, transporting relief goods, rescuing stranded civilians, and providing much-needed presence in devastated coastal towns. For many ordinary Filipinos, the sight of this gray patrol ship arriving after a typhoon was a source of hope. It carried not just supplies, but the reassuring presence of the state in times of suffering. Still, over time, the Maharlika began to show its age. Built for another era, it was not equipped with modern sensors, advanced weapon systems, or electronic warfare suites. Its armaments were limited to cannons and machine guns, weapons effective against small boats or low-level threats, but useless in a modern naval battle. Critics pointed out that in a time when neighboring countries were fielding missile-equipped frigates and submarines, the Philippine Navy was still relying on ships like the Maharlika, vessels with outdated systems and limited combat capacity. Mechanical problems also became more frequent as the years went by, leading some to question whether it was still wise to keep the ship in active service. These criticisms were not unfounded. There were instances when the Maharlika suffered breakdowns at sea, highlighting the risks of keeping an aging vessel in operation. Yet, despite its shortcomings, the ship remained active for decades, and this persistence speaks volumes about the reality of running a navy in a developing country. Unlike wealthy nations that can afford to retire ships early and replace them with the latest technology, the Philippines had to stretch the service life of every vessel. The Maharlika might not have been state-of-the-art, but it was still seaworthy enough to patrol, to transport, to serve. And in a navy where every ship counts, that was reason enough to keep it going. For the sailors who served aboard it, the ship was not defined by its flaws, but by the missions they accomplished together. Ask any crew member and they'll tell you stories of long patrols, of standing watch under the tropical sun, of helping families during disasters. These human stories are what give the Maharlika its true character. When we step back and look at the bigger picture, the Maharlika represents a transitional phase in Philippine naval history. On one hand, it was a reminder of reliance on foreign transfers and aging platforms. On the other, it was a stepping stone, holding the line until the Navy could finally acquire more modern ships. This contrast became sharper as the Navy embarked on its modernization program. With the arrival of brand new frigates like BRP Jose Rizal and BRP Antonio Luna, the gap between old and new became striking. The modern ships had missiles, radar, and advanced communication systems. The Maharlika had only the basics. And yet, for many years before the modernization took off, it was ships like Maharlika that were out there in the West Philippine Sea, showing presence, upholding sovereignty, and reminding everyone that the Philippines would not simply abandon its water. The symbolism of its name added another layer to this story. Maharlika as a concept is deeply tied to national pride. It suggests nobility without royalty, freedom without arrogance, strength rooted in service. Naming a ship Maharlika was like declaring that this vessel, however modest, carried the noble duty of guarding the seas. And in a sense, that symbolism compensated for its material limitations. Even if the ship lacked modern weapons, it had the spirit of the Maharlika, loyal, steadfast, and unyielding. Many naval enthusiasts argue that this symbolic value is just as important as physical capabilities, especially in a country where morale and identity are key to national defense. Of course, we can't ignore the controversies. Online naval forums, defense analysts, and even ordinary citizens often pointed out that ships like Maharlika gave the Navy a reputation for being outdated. There were jokes, criticisms, and frustrations. Why was the Philippines relying on such old ships? Why not decommission them and invest in fewer but newer vessels? These debates reflect the complexity of defense policy in the Philippines. It's easy to say about new ships, but procurement takes time, money, and political will. Until then, the old ships had to keep sailing. And that's exactly what Maharlika did.